We are picking up in Mark, the 7th chapter. We'll be looking at verses 31 through 37, which will be once again an example of the healing power of Jesus. We have just come off a passage where he had gone to the Gentile region, where he performed a miracle for a woman who had come to him, pleading on behalf of her daughter that she be healed. And he just tells her to go her way, that the healing has taken place. So we see in that Jesus' power to heal, whether present or not. We're going to pick up now in verse 31 and once again see his power to heal. And again, departing from the region of Tyre and Sidon, he came through the midst of the region of Decapolis to the Sea of Galilee. Then they brought to him one who was deaf and had an impediment in his speech, and they begged him to put his hand on him. And he took him aside from the multitude, and put his fingers in his ears, and he spat and touched his tongue. Then he looked up to heaven, he sighed, and said to him, Ephphatha, that is, be opened. Immediately his ears were opened, and the impediment of his tongue was loosed, and he spoke plainly. Then he commanded them that they should tell no one, but the more he commanded them, the more widely they proclaimed it. And they were astonished beyond measure, saying, He has done all things well. He makes both the deaf to hear and the mute to speak. So picking up at verse 31, we see that he travels through the region of Decapolis. And so what this is letting us know is that Jesus did not head straight back to the Jewish cities, but he actually, you would say he took the long route, or went a long way about where his journeys were to take him. And it shows us that he still has chosen to remain in the Gentile region for a period longer. In verses 32 and 33, again we read, They brought to him one who was deaf and had an impediment in his speech, and they begged him to put his hand on him. And he took him aside from the multitude, and put his fingers in his ears, and he spat and touched his tongue. So the first thing that we have here, or that we see again, is we see people approaching Christ on behalf of another and interceding for another. People who are pleading for those that, in this particular case, and I believe in the one previously, people that could not plead for themselves. But what we have here is we have these people asking Jesus in faith, they believe he can do this, to heal. And we also see, embodied in these particular passages, much like we saw in the previous set of scripture, the love for other human beings and the compassion that people have for one another. But again, this is a situation not where we have someone coming and pleading on their own behalf, but they are pleading on behalf of another. And then it says they've asked him to touch him, and were probably expecting to see some type of miracle. And we read that the statement, he took him aside from the multitude. Now, we're not told why, and many people have speculated as to why he might have removed this man from the crowd prior to his act of healing. There is nothing in Scripture that tells us one way or another. The only thing that we need to focus on is the fact that he made the decision, he being Christ, made the decision to take this man aside, away from the multitude, before doing anything else. And then it says, he put his fingers in his ears, and he spat and touched his tongue. And upon first glance, again, it might be kind of hard to understand. Why did he put his fingers in his ears? Why did he spit? And all of these things. As I look at it, the things that we can see is this is a very different healing process than we have seen in the past. What we do see him do, or what does stand out to me in this particular instance, is that he actually is going to physically touch those areas in which the man has the ailment. He touches his, he puts his fingers in his ears and he touches his tongue. Of course, we understand that the man cannot hear and that he has a speech impediment. Again, there is much speculation, and many people will try to go into and might consider reasons why he chose to put his fingers in his ears, why he chose to spit, and why he chose to touch the tongue. In the long run, it really doesn't matter, because if that was something that we needed to know, then we would have been told why. What we do know, again, are simply the actions that have taken place. In verses 34 and 35 we read, "Then looking up to heaven, he sighed and said to him, Ephphatha, that is, be opened. And immediately his ears were opened, and the impediment of his tongue was loosed, and he spoke plainly." So then looking up to heaven, he sighed. We see oftentimes that Jesus will look to heaven, acknowledging God the Father, recognizing where the healing power comes from. That may be the reason why, is simply an acknowledgement. Again, that's somewhat speculative, but we do know once again that that's what he's done. The sigh is really a show of compassion for the suffering that this man feels, based on the idea that when we suffer, Christ suffers. And so again, this particular side, that is a little bit of speculation. There are scholars out there who talk about what the original word means in its original language and how it's used in different passages. But again, for our particular purposes, as we're studying with someone who is not familiar with Scripture, we simply recognize that Christ does a couple of things. He looks up to heaven and he sighs. And then he makes the statement, and he gives this word, which is translated for us by Mark, which means be opened. And we see that once this is done, we see that word immediately again. And oftentimes when we go through, and I encourage you to go back and look at the various times that Christ performs miracles, and you will see that term appear very often. And that's because when Christ performs an act, it takes place immediately. It's when he does something, when he performs a miracle, it's not like the phony faith healers of today who will say, go your way and eventually you will be healed, or if your faith is strong enough, you eventually will be healed. Or your faith wasn't strong enough and that's why you weren't healed. But we see once again the phrase given by Christ to be opened, and immediately the eyes were opened, his tongue was loosed, and he was able to speak plainly. And so these two things that this man was hindered with, these two things that the people there were hoping that Christ would heal, were in fact immediately healed. And closing out chapter 7 in verses 36 and 37, "Then he commanded them that they should tell no one, but the more he commanded them, the more widely they proclaimed it. And they were astonished beyond measure, saying, He has done all things well. He makes both the deaf to hear and the mute to speak." And so once again, we see a situation and a time where after Jesus has performed a miracle, he tells the people not to go and tell everyone about it, challenges him to not speak of it, which is kind of ironic in this particular case, because now that the man is able to speak, he's told not to speak of it. It's a little ironic. We see that in the past Jesus has commanded silence, and we see, though, the response of the people. They're so amazed, they're so excited, they're so grateful at what's been done, that the more he commands them not to speak, the more they speak of it. You hear people say, well, I just couldn't help myself. Well, this is a situation where they were so grateful for the miracle that has taken place. They were so bubbled over at what's been done that they wanted to share this with others. And again, we see the phrase, and they were astonished beyond measure. Their recognition is he has done all things well. They see what he's done. He makes the deaf to hear and the mute to speak. And so we see in this text a true expression, first in these verses, of the faith that they have in Jesus and their appreciation and love for all the things that he does, and that he does all things well. And it's astonishing to them, even though they believe he can do it, even though they bring people to him, it's still astonishing to see the actual effect and after effect of when a miracle takes place. And so really this is just a closing out of the section that we've been in Mark chapter 7, and it is once again just a reminder of the great things that Jesus Christ did while he was here on this earth, and should be a reminder to us of the great things that he can do for us and is willing to do for us if we follow his will. We'll be picking up in the not too distant future at Mark the 8th chapter and beginning at the first verse, and I encourage you to go ahead and read ahead. Thank you.